I trust this parliament? Because I don't want to put my life in their hands. Because every test that has been put before them since the signing of the National Accord, they have failed. Do we want to trust them with the new constitution?
Yeah, because she's talking about the National Accord was to stand as the law of Kenya until the next election or until the enactment of the new constitution. So now there's the problem of a serious conflict of interest created by the transition clauses.
Legislation that is going to be created by this new constitution.
There's also transitional
and if like
provisions.
that legislation has been the problems that have led us to where we are today, shouldn't we be worried about who's going to do it? Shouldn't we go back to the polls and ask Kenyans now, knowing what we need and what we need done, can we elect people who can do those things for us?
I think you are touching on an important issue. But it is important for you to mentally analyze where the buck rests. I think the buck does not rest with Parliament. I think if you want real solution, the buck rests
with the public,
with the government,
with the government,
with the government.
So,
I'll tell you why.
Yeah. The Grand Coalition government.
The Grand Coalition government. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Because the government still controls Parliament.
Yes.
There are instances where Parliament has asserted itself.
Yes.
But by and large, the government, the president, the prime minister here, the ministers, the cabinet, they control, they influence things. And where they don't influence, they buy support. I'm trying to say the buck rests with the Grand Coalition government. And this is what I was saying. The question to my mind is, are we not being naive in expecting this Grand Coalition government to implement Agenda 4?
Yes.
They cannot. You're asking them to hang themselves. And that's what I was trying to say. The international community needs to understand that. If you are to take Kenya as a nation, all the shortcomings that I was trying to point out from 1963, in terms of a patient, if Kenya was a human being, okay, you've seen those very emaciated people in Turkana, somebody who has not eaten for weeks, okay. You cannot bring that person in that condition here, and because you are feeling so compassionate, and present them with a T-bone and chips, and you will kill him.
Yes.
Because the body cannot cope with it.
Yeah.
You'll die.
Yes.
So you need to begin with giving him milk, juices, until the body is now able to cope with a piece of steak.
Yeah.
And Kenya is in that situation. We are very sick patients. And if you tell us to implement Agenda 4, you kill us. If you are asking this Grand Coalition to do it.
But then
what I'm saying, you need.
Opposite coin.
No.
If they don't implement.
No.
We're finished anyway.
No. We need to be pragmatic.
Yes.
Asking the Grand Coalition government to implement Agenda 4 is like asking Pinochet to implement the reforms that are represented under Agenda 4. It will not happen. So how did it happen in Chile? They were gradual. They just focused on those reforms that made it possible for democratic elections to take place and to usher in a democratic government that was then able to address historical injustices. How do you ask this Grand Coalition government to address historical injustices when they are the ones who are guilty? It won't happen. That's why I think the way forward is not to hammer your head against a brick wall in asking them to implement this. It is to pick on those reforms that would provide the constitutional and statutory framework within which this country can have elections. Free and fair elections tomorrow. Hopefully, usher in a reformist government that can be able to implement the rest of Agenda 4, including a sound constitution, because these people will not be able to.
And you would say that those reforms, just to restate so that's clear.
Judiciary is very critical. Judiciary is very critical, but there are challenges there because last time in 05 they had sponsored litigation, and there's no reason why it might not happen again. But it needs to be done. You need to focus on the chapter on representation of the people. I think we need to debate that first. You need to professionalize the ECK. In fact, one of the major weaknesses of the current draft is that you see they've lumped the ECK with all the other commissions. They've not even spelled out the qualifications. I think the ECK is so central to democratization that it needs special constitutional treatment.
That's right.
So that you agree on a professional ECK, not a representative ECK, not each region or each party nominating. Commissioners like 5 who are going to be vetted and approved by Parliament and given operational budget autonomy and given powers to give orders to the police during elections so that we can rely on them. I think we need the 50+1 before we can move towards making a choice whether we want parliamentary system or whether we want presidential system. Those are the reforms that I would like to see being enacted now. Because the issue of historical injustice, I would leave it to a reformist government. The issue of land, the issue of a new constitution that is going to have all the other necessary ingredients like parliamentary or presidential, I would leave them for the next government. But if you are trying to have it all together, it is impossible. Above all, as I said earlier, none of these presidential candidates want a new constitution. They all think they can become president. Each one of them wants to enjoy the current powers in.
And what is the urgency in terms of these minimum reforms? Because for me,
they should have happened yesterday.
The warning bells. What would happen today, perish the thought, if the president were to die?
We would go to
in our current status, and this is not something that any one of us is in control of, but it's possible. Without voters register, without reforms, and without healing, without having dealt with any of the serious problems that took us to the violence of 2007-2008. Are we not gambling?
And do we have confidence that the interim ECK would be able to conduct?
It would fail. Because the sample, the Shinani and Bomajode, showed that it's a still shadow of the ECK. But aren't we gambling with our lives? And aren't we actually in a more dangerous situation than we were in December 2007?
It's a resounding yes, we are gambling. Let me tell you, it's not just if Kibaki goes to join his forefathers. It can happen.
Yes.
You can go, I can go.
Yes.
But there are considerations, like if Ocampo moves in, yes, and you have a situation where 3-4 cabinet ministers are facing prosecution, the only way legitimacy can be restored to that government is by holding elections.
Yeah.
And you are not in a position to hold elections. So to me, this is what I would prioritize. Now to go back to the point you were raising earlier, and I was saying the buck rests with the government in terms of the way forward. And as I was indicating, one sort of senses that there isn't any serious political will on the part of the Grand Coalition government, and in particular on the part of any of these presidential candidates, to give Kenya a new constitution. One senses that each of these presidential candidates harbors a secret desire to be elected president on the basis of the current constitution that creates the imperial presidency, so that he or she can exercise those powers in the same way that they've been exercised by the first president, the second president, and the third president. I think that is something that the Kenyan people need to have at the back of their mind. There's a lot of posturing about support for the new constitution. The sense I get is that there is that's mere political posturing. There isn't any commitment. Point number 2. There are serious concerns about the draft constitution, particularly as regards representation of the people chapter, which has not been well thought out, and in respect of which there needs to be a lot of consensus. Serious concerns on the chapter on devolution, again the rationale the criteria for the creation of constituencies, districts, which are now called counties, and to some extent the provinces, has not been addressed. There are serious concerns on the system of government. There are serious issues like land that will take a lot of time for people to debate and develop a consensus on. So I mentioned this to make the point that even if there was political will to get a new constitution, there are issues that are obviously going to take much longer. And therefore the issue is, what is the way forward? And to me, the way forward is to focus on a package of reforms that can provide the statutory and constitutional framework within which this country can have free and fair elections tomorrow, should the need arise, and the results of which will be acceptable even by the losers. Those reforms should focus on the ECK in terms of professionalizing it, in terms of how the chair and the commissioners are going to be identified and vetted and approved, in terms of giving that ECK operational budget autonomy and sufficient powers, including power to give instructions to the police during elections. They have to do with addressing the representation of the people. They have to do with at least enacting 50+1. That package, you can figure it. Other issues of concern to the people in the diaspora, like dual citizenship, which nobody sort of objects to. I think if that was to be done, then this country will be in a position to hold elections tomorrow. Because if you try to conceptualize what would happen tomorrow if we were to wake up and, God forbid, and we find that Mheshimiwa Kibaki has left us. We don't even have a voters register. The current constitution provides for the vice president to take over for 90 days. Will we be able to compile a voters register within those 90 days and conduct elections? Do we expect the right honorable Prime Minister to accept that a person he defeated by a wide margin becomes the acting president for 90 days? Isn't it more likely than not that the Prime Minister will start arguing that the accord takes precedence over that particular constitutional provision for 90 days, permitting the Vice President to take over? Will you be able to hold elections? So to me, it is very critical to be pragmatic and to realize that enacting the Constitution in its entirety may not be possible. The only other one we need to add to this package of essential reforms is the judiciary, so that we can have a judiciary, including Supreme Court, that can be able to resolve our difficulties. So whether you call them minimum reforms, whether you call them essential reforms, whether you call them stabilizing reforms, what is in the name? Let's have that package enacted now. And finally, when you look at the transitional provisions in the draft constitution, some reason it has quietly amended, or rather it is seeking to quietly amend the accord. If you remember, the accord had promised, or rather required, the two principles to give us a new constitution within 12 months. The accord was signed on the 28th of February, 08. So we should have had a new constitution by the 1st of March this year. As it is, the new constitution is not even in sight. And yet, in the transitional provisions, the draft constitution now seeks to amend that accord, which provided that the life of the Grand Coalition, because it was in the nature of a truce, really, given that the Kriegler Commission made it quite clear that it is impossible to tell who won. So the thinking behind the National Accord was that all the recommendations should be done within the timelines, so that the Grand Coalition can come to an end, and so that the Kenyan people can go back to the elections and legitimately elect a government with a mandate. So now, the peculiar recommendation in this draft constitution is that it is amending that accord in order to extend the life of the Grand Coalition to 2012, when quite clearly the accord intended the Grand Coalition to last for a specific period of time. That's why they were required to give us a new constitution within 12 months. And the accord said, on the coming into force of a new constitution, the Grand Coalition will start dissolved. The other eventuality was if one partner withdrew from the accord. So the contemplation of the accord was that the government was not to last for more than 12 months, so as to enable the Kenyan people to elect a government with a mandate. But now it's extended for the balance of the 3 years to 2012, and without any explanation by the committee of experts as to where that came from. Because when you go through the report that formed the basis of the drafting of the draft constitution, you don't find any groups that agitated for the extension of the life of the Grand Coalition government to 2012. This is being, being done very quietly. Yeah. So it is very important for the international community to really understand there is a tall order to expect the difficulties in the current constitution to be resolved in time for this constitution to attract a yes vote at the referendum. And one should bear in mind the very unsatisfactory results of this draft constitution being defeated at the referendum. And one should not go on the basis that is going to be voted for affirmatively. I think there is a misconception on the part of the political leaders that, like last time, 05, if they tell people it is a good constitution, they will vote yes for it. And I think there is perhaps a disconnect between the political leaders and the public. I think the public can defy the political leaders and say it's not a good constitution and we are not going to vote for it. Yes, we all want a new constitution. But we don't want any constitution simply because it is a new constitution and whatever costs. We're looking forward to a constitution that we are confident its provisions will provide a firm foundation for generations to come for this country. So it's not an issue now of compromising and like the hybrid in order because you want to please everybody. It's a question of looking long term rather than just the present.
One last thing, maybe you could comment. Constitutions are about Kenyans, aren't they?
Yes.
But this one doesn't seem to have the Kenyan at the center. To give you an example, the Bill of Rights, for example, even if we had to say it's an improvement on the current one, is one of the few sections of the Constitution whose implementation is deferred for up to 3 years in some cases. For example, the disabled Kenyan citizens will have certain rights. Legislation is proposed to take place over a 3-year period. What do you have a comment on that? Just given the philosophy of the Constitution.
Well, by and large, I like the enlarged Bill of Rights in terms of bringing in the economic health issues and things like those ones. But I think there are aspects that have not been very well thought out. The long list of statutes which must be enacted, with provisions that if Parliament does not enact this within this period of time, you petition to the Constitutional Court and Parliament can be dissolved. I see it as being very unrealistic. I think a more realistic approach would have been for the Committee of Experts to itself access drafting experts so that all these statutes that they are saying Parliament shall enact can actually be now made available to the Kenyan people so that we can read the substance of it. And that can be done so that they can go to Parliament as drafts Parliament could still change or amend here and there. But I think even the Kenyan people need to see, because these are the statutes which are going to operationalize the draft constitution. So I think that is a methodology they could have adopted, and I hope if they are listening to suggestions, they will take up that suggestion, because I cannot see Parliament being able, asking the Attorney General to enact these bills or these statutes within the timelines that are being laid down there. It's not going to happen at all.
I mean, if you think of the special tribunal, it's not, the government never published that bill.
And yet, it was a requirement in the accord.
Yeah.
The requirement in the national accord was for them to have a special tribunal bill meeting international standards. But when you look at what was presented to Parliament by the Honorable Mother Karua, the then Minister of Justice, it did not meet international standards, because the powers of the President were left intact. The immunity of the President was left intact. The power of the President to confer immunity and pardon to any individuals was left intact. The powers of the Attorney General was left intact. The likelihood of challenge by the current judiciary was left intact. So it is a good thing that Parliament rejected that bill, because it was going to be a charade. It was just going to provide an opportunity to the Grand Coalition government to stage manage a special tribunal for Kenya at the expense of the victims. And when a good bill is now drafted, the Gitobu Manyara bill, for some reason they don't want it anymore. They don't want to support it. And you find talk that we should now go to the TJRC, Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, to resolve these things, even when the accord was talking about the Waki Commission, about the Curricular Commission. They also talked about TJRC, which is meant to look at the historical injustices and that sort of thing. But look at the structure of the TJRC.
Look at the budget.
Look at the budget. And I have taken interest in asking members of the Committee on the Administration of Justice who are going through these TJRC nominees. Unfortunately, truth must be told, at least, and I'm not sort of being unduly critical on my friend. I've got a lot of time, the Honorable Abdikadir. But at least when I was chairing that committee, we used to set the criteria for interviewing prospective commissioners, like the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, like the members of the advisory board. We would have a very objective criteria, because the requirement to take into account the regional diversity of the Kenyan people, we never allowed that to impact on the qualifications. So what we did is that in some regions we would require re-advertisement, so as to make sure that the person who comes from a particular region also meets this criteria. What I understand is now happening is that a representative from Central Province, once they canvass with the who is who in the political arena, they are then say this is the nominee of Central Province. And the other regions sort of tend to say, all right, if that is the nominee of the Central Province, so be it.
That's right. So we're not selecting for the whole country.
No, you're not even examining, is this person qualifications in terms of integrity and matters like this. So Eastern Province, they will start haggling. Oh, no, for that other commission, the person came from Upper Eastern. So this is the time for Lower Eastern or Central Eastern and that sort of thing. You see what I mean?
Yes.
The result is that Parliament and the committee, they are not interrogating the suitability of people. What am I saying? I am saying that the chair of the current TJRC canvassed certain people to be proposed as a nominee of Rift Valley. And as long as he was proposed as a nominee of Rift Valley, as a region, the other regions don't question. So it isn't any wonder that thereafter the power wielders in Rift Valley were able to convince people. You started seeing marriages of convenience between this region and that region. And somebody saying, I mean, this is a senior person, should become the chair, and being appointed the chair. And it isn't any wonder to some of those of us who analyze these things, that immediately that TGRC was constituted, almost immediately you started hearing reconciliation, let us end all these post-election violence, this matter, let's forget about the Hague, let's forget about the Special Tribunal for Kenya, let us take this. And the cabinet sat down and made that decision.
That's right. Yeah.
If anyone wants any other evidence that the current political wielders, the current Grand Coalition is not serious, they are thinking more about how they can cover each other's, the perpetrators and the suspects. They are not thinking, one, about the victims, and they are not thinking about the real possibility of recurrence of violence if this impunity goes unpunished.
Here's a devil's advocate question. Could it be that they don't think about the recurrence of violence because they have the monopoly of violence?
Definitely. I mean, it's almost as if quietly they want to legitimize violence as an instrument of political power games. That I'm the warlord. I mean, if it goes on like this, it is a warlord who will be dictating.
Will be in our government.
Absolutely.